Professor Sachidanand Sinha, patron of the IIG, Professor K.R. Dikshit, the eminent geographers across the country, dear participants. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome all of you for this celebrating the 46th Foundation Day and organizing an online lecture by Professor Anindita Datta, who is the Vice President of the IGU and presently Head of the Department of Geography, University of Delhi, New Delhi. Her topic is Reflections on Gender and Feminist Geographies. So welcome you, madam, for delivering this lecture, these things. So before going for this, this is the 46th Foundation Day, in a brief, I just want to be aware all of you about the journey of these 46 years journey in nutshell of the IIG. The Institute of Geographers, Institute of Indian Geographers, what we call as the IIG, was founded in 9 February 1979 in Pune. At the initiative of Professor K.R. Dikshit, the then professor and head of the Department of Geography, at that time it was University of Pune. And he is the founder president of the institute. The Department of Geography, Savitribai Phule Pune University, is the registered headquarters. The institute strived, actually the main aim of this institute is to promote the geographical knowledge by research, teaching, and such activities which will directly or indirectly lead to the growth of geography. There are some important activities or important feature of this institute. First is the annual meet of what we call as the annual conference. So right from the inception of the institute, what we call as a 3-day annual meet or conference have been held every year across the country and in any university actually. So all conveners put in their best effort to organize the conference most appropriately, often with regional flavors in their hospitality and choice of focal themes. So recently 45th was organized at NIHU Shillong. Sunil Kumar Day from the NIHU was the convener. And the forthcoming 46th annual meet has been decided to be HNB Garhwal University, Srinagar Garhwal, Uttarakhand. Professor M.S. Panwar will be who is the head of the department organizing it. To encourage the research student to present their research finding at the meet, the institute is annually giving an award, the Best Young Geographer Award. It is a part of the annual meet. And I think it's become the very prestigious kind of the award for the younger are always wanted to be a part of that and have the Best Geographer Award actually. The two important activities, what we can say, one is the A.B. Mukherjee Memorial Lecture that we have been organizing for the last few years. And last 2 years, actually, Azazuddin Ahmad, the fund was generated with the initiative of the Professor Sachidanand Sinha. And through that fund, with IIG, we are organizing the Azazuddin Ahmad Memorial Lecture. That also become a very prominent feature of the institute. Another important aspects or important feature of the institute is the transaction, the journal which we have been publishing since the inception of the institute. It is actually started, the little bit history about it. It's second meeting of the governing council of the IIG on 11th March in 1979. And they decided to publish half-yearly journal, Transaction, and the name is given, Transaction of the Institute of Indian Geographers. The first issue of the journal was ceremoniously released and largely attended function in very prestigious hall, that is the Shivaji Hall of the university, and the Honorable Vice Chancellor G.S. Mahajani was the present there. Since the transaction, almost till today, we are regularly publishing it, and 46 years uninterrupted publication, we have been doing this. The journal is listed in the Scopus since the 1980s and UGC tier list right from the beginning when the UGC started this tier list system. So far, the journal has been edited by 5 professors, initially Professor K.R. Dikshit, then Professor S.C. Gupte, then Professor Jaimala Didi, Professor S.R. Jog, and presently Professor D.K. Naik. The IIG is grateful to all these editors for doing their job at the best of their ability. Because of their efforts, the journal is remained in the Scopus as well as in the UGC list. Apart from that, one of the aim of this to conduct the seminars. So initially some seminars were conducted. One was conducted in the Bilaspur by Dr. Manju Mitra in 1993 on tribals in contemporary India. Then Professor K.R. Dikshit was conducted in November 2002 in the Pune, that is managing the urban fringe Indian cities. And third one was the Marbogoa, conveyed by the Nandakumar Sawant, and he published there. The theme was the globalization issues, challenges in India, and it came into publication. So apart from that, there were the Professor K, with the initiative of the Professor K.R. Dikshit, he started the concern about the geography in contemporary period. And also he was more concerned about the geography at higher education. So he initiated the discussion. The discussion was initially initiated in 2012 is the CSS Akulam in Tirunparam. The Sri Kumar Chattopadhyay was the convener. Then at Burdwan, the NC Jana was the convener. Then Guwahati, BK Kar was the convener. Kurukshetra, MS Jaglan was the convener. Banasthali, Rashmi Sharma is convener. And even one specially with initiative take Delhi University as invited. Actually, K.R. Dikshit sir only requested Delhi University to conduct. I remember that I was the president there. And Professor S.C. Rai and Professor R.B. Singh both took the initiative, and it was one they invited who's who of the geography at that time, and it was very good concern. So these are the initiatives taken by the through the seminar also. Recently, there was seminar organized by the Sulochana Shekhar in Central University of Tamil Nadu. Then recently, just last month only, Presidency University Kolkata, Dheeraj Burman, he also organized seminar. And forthcoming seminar is in North Bengal University, Siliguri, Dr. Arindam Basak is there. Apart from there were some seminar organized by myself in Pune University Department. 4 or 5 seminars I organized for the different themes. So this is the contribution of the IIG for this, whatever in the brief I have given the journey. The membership of the institute largely drawn from the earth science, other allied disciplines, and institute proudly. Presently, we have the more than 1,100 members, which are the life members, institutional members, as well as annual members, and so on. So this is the journey what we have started with the leadership of the K.R. Dikshit. All the supports of all of you, we could able to reach today, completing the celebrating the 46th year. So thank you all, you have come here. Again, I'm really grateful to all of you for this coming here, and I'm really grateful to the Professor Anindita Datta. In a short notice, he agreed to deliver the lecture on this occasion. So thank you, Mr. Now I request the President Sachidanand Sina, President of IIG and Chair of the today's lecture. So sir, please welcome and invite the madam for the lecture.
Thank you.
Sir, before that, after that, before madam's lecture, only the Professor Bimal Kar will introduce the madam within 2 minutes.
So, okay. So, so let me once again welcome everybody to the 46th Foundation Day lecture, which is, I have the privilege to, in fact, welcome. I feel honored that Professor Anindita Datta will be presenting the 46th Foundation Day lecture on gender and feminist geographies, which I believe would be extremely absorbing for all of us and would also show some interesting areas that, many of us rarely venture to move in. Let me very quickly also remind that, this is since this is not the only lecture we have been also conducting Foundation Day lectures year after year, and maybe in due course of time, we will try to put all the lectures, Foundation Day lectures, on our website. Earlier, we didn't have the means, and we didn't have the technology to have the recordings. Now, I believe, these recordings will be available. And we were discussing with the Secretary General, and he says that, we are going to upgrade our website, and this will provide a lot of opportunities for anybody else, especially students in different universities, to access our website and understand about our activities. Yeah, in the last so many years, Professor, because of the initiative of Professor Dikshit, I remember, Professor Jeb, I forgot that, we also had a meeting in JNU.
Yes.
That was on curriculum and higher education and so on and so forth, and geography therein. That was, I believe, in 2017 or so, maybe a little before that. So, there have been a lot of discussion, and we know that, geography has been, by nature of it, it has We have new areas coming in every now and then. And so without standing between the listeners, the audience will be patiently looking forward to hearing Professor Datta, I would rather invite Professor Kar to introduce today's speaker of the 46th Foundation Day of IIG. Professor Kar, over to you.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Good morning, everybody present here in this virtual platform in connection with 46th Foundation Day lecture of Institute of Indian Geographers. Honorable President, Professor Sinha, our speaker for today, Professor Anindita Datta, esteemed members of IIG, and respected listeners from all over the country and maybe from abroad also. So it is my pleasure as a member of the IIG to once again welcome you all to this Foundation Day program of IIG. And we are very happy that Professor Anindita Datta has agreed to deliver this 46th Foundation Day lecture today. I have been given a pleasant task of introducing Professor Datta, although she doesn't require any introduction, who is well known not only in the country but also outside. Professor Anindita Datta is the professor of Department of Geography and also presently head of the department, Delhi School of Economics, Delhi University, and presently the Vice President of International Geographical Union. And we are very glad that she is the first woman geographer from the entire Asia to be elected as the Vice President of IIG in the last IGU Congress held in Dublin, Ireland. She was also the chair of the International Geographical Union on Commission on Gender and Geography. Her work focuses on gendered and epistemic violence, feminist dissidence, spaces of resistance, and geographies of care. Professor Datta has successfully introduced a new curriculum in the area of geography of gender, published consistently in internationally known peer-reviewed journals with an interdisciplinary perspective, and served as a member of international editorial boards for gender, place and culture, and social and cultural geography. Professor Datta has been invited as visiting faculty to many universities in the country and also outside. Some of those visits include Department of Gender Studies, Lund University, Sweden, under the Linnaeus Palme program, where she held an Erasmus Mundus fellowship, and she was also invited to deliver talks and keynotes at various institutes and universities outside the country, including the Royal Geographical Society and Institute of British Geographers, UK, NTNU Norway, University of Bordeaux, France, University of Iceland, University of Copenhagen, Denmark, University of Groningen, the Netherlands, Nara Women's University, Japan, among many others. She is currently an associate editor of Dialogues and Human Geography, IGU Deputy Representative to the Standing Committee on Gender Equality in Sciences, and recipient of the 2023 Jan Monk Service Award for her contributions to feminist geography. Her recent books include Gender, Space and Agency in India, Exploring Regional Genderscapes, and the co-edited volumes Elgar Handbook on Gender and Cities, Bridging Worlds Building Feminist Geographies, and Routledge Handbook of Gender and Feminist Geographies. A soldier's daughter, Professor Anindita, grew up in different cantonment towns all over the country, has traveled continuously across India, leaving her with a finely honed spatial imagination that throws up startling insights in her explorations of space and place. With these words about Professor Anindita Datta, it is my pleasure on behalf of the IIG to request her to deliver the Foundation Day lecture. Thank you. It is over to Professor Anindita Datta.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
All right. So, first of all, if my slides are visible, respected chair, dear colleagues, students, and my dear friends, warm greetings on the occasion of the 46th Foundation Day of the Institute of Indian Geographers, our very own IIG. It is my proud privilege as the Vice President of the IGU and life member of IIG to deliver the Foundation Day lecture today. At the very onset, I extend my thanks and warm regards to Professor K.R. Dixit for his vision and tireless work in initiating and shaping this association. I'm thankful to Professor Jay Bhai also for his kind and persistent invitations for yet another occasion to participate in IIG lectures. Looking back on the time of its inception, truly a professional body to reflect, introspect, initiate debate and discussions on matters related to geography, its ontology, epistemology, theory, praxis, must have been felt acutely at the time the discipline itself was undergoing such radical transformations. As we all know well, the new philosophical influences of Marxism, realism, postmodernism were beginning to be felt within the domain of research and teaching in human geography at this point of time. On the other hand, another interesting development was the unfolding of the cultural turn, the debates around post-positive geography, and one can only imagine the euphoria, enthusiasm, and the need to come together as a professional body, especially in India, to challenge the Western hegemonic narratives of our discipline. History has it that the idea was first mooted by Professor Dixit, the then head of the department at the Department of Geography, University of Pune, in July 1978. First pre-registration meeting of the teachers of the Department of Geography was held on 28th October 1978, and a joint appeal signed by all the faculty was issued on the 7th of November 1978. On all these significant dates, which are there on the IIG's website, I cherish the fact that as the IIG was awakening to its existence, in the same city of Pune, then Pune, a 10-year-old girl was cycling from 5 Prince of Wales Road near Ghorpuri to her school, St. Mary's School, on what was then Staveley Road, little knowing that 4.5 decades later, she would be invited to deliver the Foundation Day address. As I have remarked several times before, feminist lives are connected and shape us in so many invisible but sure ways. Thank you once again, Professor Dikshit and the founder members, and those special moments that led to the birth of this moment here and now. In this Foundation Day lecture, I choose to reflect upon geography's fastest growing and most dynamic and inclusive subfield. Ladies and gentlemen, I share with you my reflections on gender and feminist geographies in IIG's quadriennial years. For the sake of context, I situate my reflections against a chronology of milestones, each of which I happen to have had the privilege to participate in. Understanding chronology, as we all know, is of the utmost importance. So, starting with the first milestone, IGU recently celebrated its centenary in the year 2022. At the same time, not very far behind, we marked 100 years of geography in India just a few months ago at the Aligarh Muslim University, and subsequent celebrations in other departments of the country. Another milestone that we need to take into account is of this day. IIG has turned 46. So almost half a century old, a professional association that has brought us all together is almost 50, And against this, I situate the tricentenary or 30-year anniversary of the IGU Commission on Gender and Geography, which I had the privilege to preside over as its chair in the same year as the centenary of the IGU celebrated in Paris in 2022. It is also 3 decades since NAGI hosted its first session on gender and geography in 1992 in Magad University, Bodh Gaya. It is 17 years since the first syllabus on gender and geography was initiated, and 5 years, only 5 years, since there has been the institution of the Standing Committee on Gender Equality in the Sciences. Against these important milestones, my reflections are: what space has gender and feminist geographies claimed in India? From the quiet beginnings that I'm going to speak about in just a few minutes, what are the new directions? And most importantly, who does gender and feminist geographies in India? In a recent exposition, while we were debating on the future of geography with a whole group of scholars from around the world, one thing emerged very definitively. Whose stories of the past, diagnosis of the present, and visions of possible futures of geography acquire visibility and legitimacy in the discipline are shaped by at least 5 factors. The first among these are institutional hierarchies. As you all know, our institutional landscapes are not uniform.
Excuse me, Professor Datta, your slides are not moving.
No, it's not going to move. It's not supposed to move. I have full control, and I will move it when I need to
Okay,
show
okay. I
something.
saw in the chat box
Yes,
also people are writing.
yes.
Anyway, fine.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not the PowerPoint queen, but I can move the slides. Yeah. Okay. So the first is institutional and hierarchies. And as you know that, our institutional landscape is not uniform. So we have different levels of institutions wherein the discipline is taught and practiced. And we need to take into account these hierarchies in looking at the futures or even the current context of geography. The second point that we all agreed on when debating on the futures of geography is the importance of neo-colonial, imperial, and capitalist relations, which have very definitively shaped the histories and geographies of geography of our discipline. Okay. Then the racial, gendered, and class power asymmetries. Doreen Massey introduced us to this idea of power geometries and power asymmetries. And we understand that there are strong asymmetries, and it is not a flat scape or a flat landscape in terms of race, gender, and class. And that is something we need to keep in mind. And finally, linguistic hegemonies. The idea of an official language or the language of teaching and research in different institutions, all of this also has a bearing on the directions particular subfields will take and who opts for those. And finally, overarchingly and most importantly, the politics of geographical knowledge production. So, together, all of these, and in particular, the last, will influence methodologies and has also influenced our thematic focus, right? So, now I move my slide and you can tell me if it's visible. Could you see the new slide?
Yes, 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 ma'am.
All right. So this is again something that I have talked about a lot. In fact, I've been writing about this for over a decade, that we need to understand that given the politics of knowledge creation, the institutional landscape, funding, linguistic hegemony, and all of these, we in India, those of us who are, especially those of us who are doing gender and feminist geography, but I'm sure this is also felt in other subfields. We are writing against what I have called an onto-epistemological triad. Now, this is a triad where we have development goals, quantitative methods, and what Doreen Massey has called the petrification of concepts. So, it is within this triad that you have the relevance of research being placed. So, quantitative methods will be privileged. The particular kinds of concepts, which to my view, and most feminist geographers will agree with me, concepts which have petrified tend to get privileged, and all of this, all research that is considered relevant is pushed into the envelope of development goals. So, what this does in 3 bullet points, if you want me to tell you, is that it reconstructs a lack of agency, glosses over emotions and experiences, which we now know in the emotional turn of geography are paramount in shaping research and geographical praxis. And it also, for me as a feminist scholar, I see that it hides feminist dissidence, especially in southern societies. So it replicates the colonial view from nowhere, marginalizes and makes invisible our local, vernacular, traditional, and intuitive knowledge that we have grown up with. These are somehow considered unscientific, outside the purview of our research, and we are yet to develop a vernacular, a sort of a vernacular vocabulary which we can bring into or bring in conversation with the theoretical stances that we are taking in geography. And to my mind, this particular onto-epistemological triad, and I use very strong words, it circumcises the limits or the potential of feminist geographies. It offers no ontological depth, and the focus of the research gets limited to frequency of occurrence, distributions, and concentrations at the cost of interrogating social structures, collecting stories, identifying patterns in people's spatial decision making at the cost of from their stories, right? So what we are left with is generally statistics, and the stories behind these statistics tend to get hidden. And this triad also effectively pushes gender and feminist geographies to a marginal position, framing them as development issues, flattens diversity, and facilitates monolithic constructs. This in a country of immense diversity. The diversity that we have socially mirrors the kind of diversity that we have geomorphologically. I'm sure there are plenty of geomorphologists in the audience who can tell you just how diverse we are. Yeah. So moving on, and I'll keep this slide on for the 1 minute more. So let us look at, before we move on, let us look at what happened in the past before we go into the future. So I've moved my slide again. Can you see? Can you see the slide? New slide? Now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So here we go. So this is the quiet beginnings. Again, this is not something new. I've been writing about this for a long time now. And there has been no real documentation of the history of geographies of gender and feminist geographies in India. It has been written, the story has been written and told and retold from many perspectives, right? But the interesting thing was that this subfield was not initiated with a debate as it happened in the Anglosphere or the Western English speaking context. So there was a debate about the visibility of women and gender issues in geography, which led to a whole lot of, sequential events leading to eventually the birth of this subfield. But unlike that context, in India, there was no overt debate, no overt challenge to the mainstream. But you have certain points, certain milestones through which you can trace the beginnings of this subfield. One way of doing it, the manner which I did it, was to look at what was happening in the larger context, the national context, and then subsequently look at some of the older journals of geography and see which were the papers published there. So those papers were our flagship papers, so to speak. So if you look at the national context, you had the Towards Equality report, which was tabled in Parliament subsequently. So this was commissioned in 74 and tabled in Parliament in 75. And let's not forget, this was the UN Decade for Women. Feminist activism was at an all-time high. This was driven by the Mathura, Maya Tyagi, and Ramiza B rape cases. These were custodial cases. And then you had also at this time the, coming out of Manushi in 1979, exactly the same year which IIG took birth formally. So there you can find a compendium of Manushi's, papers and articles in search of answers. And I think Sachi sir will remember, he signed off the bill. That was one of the first books I bought with my fellowship and has been immensely helpful even now. You had at that time the persona of Mrs. Gandhi as an invincible politician, similar to what we see as Modi ji now. So there was no other alternative to that kind of political domination. And this was mirrored in mainstream cinema as well. You had, artists like Rekha, Shabana Azmi, Smita Patil playing very strong women author-backed roles, right? So we can say in Hindi, "Mahal ban raha tha," yeah, the context was right. And it is against this context that you find early papers on female migration, literacy, work participation, but there was no debate on women's invisibility within geography. I did this exercise and I found that the first paper was Professor Swaranjit Mehta's. So if you look at this citation in 2019, this was published in Gender, Place and Culture. You can find the details and you can read more about this exciting but quiet period. So the larger context doesn't really find a resonance within teaching and research in human geography in India. And I think these flagship papers were written by young women scholars, recent hires, PhD scholars. They are now in their 80s, and we thank them for actually opening the field, right? But overall, it was a period of missed opportunities despite the context in the country being ripe for a discussion on gender issues. In a project that was funded by the University of Delhi, I looked at and looked at the life stories of these founding members or founding feminists in geography. I'm not sure if all of them would refer to themselves as feminists, but definitely the first few papers, the PhDs did come from them. So this project was called Voices from the Disciplinary Edge, and I conducted life story interviews, which subsequently were transcribed and coded. So Professor Swaranjit Mehta, Professor Saraswati Raju, Professor Abha Lakshmi Singh, then there were other professors from West Bengal, Assam, Professor Mahfuza Rahman, Professor Kea Dasgupta. All of these had very generously agreed to give me their time and answered all the questions in depth. And some of the things that emerged after coding that interview data was that the familial context of these scholars was such that gender questions were very much, dining table discussion, if you may. So they were in that sense ahead of their times. These women also had strong personalities and were able to establish fictive relationships and forge allyship in their departments and managed to hold their own, including leadership positions as head of the departments, chairs of committees, etc. And another interesting thing that I found is that caste, class, and social privilege that they enjoyed overrides the gender disadvantage that they might have faced. So this is for the the kind of quiet beginnings. Now from this we have a generation, another decade. So this was the early beginnings. Then you had the 1990s, where I must mention my teacher Professor Saraswati Raju and others, Professor Mehta, Professor Mahfuza Rahman, Professor Atya Habib, and several others who were bringing in these questions related to gender obliquely, directly, indirectly in their teaching and their praxis. Most importantly, they provided role models in a in a landscape of teaching and research which was heavily dominated by men. These women scholars provided role models and acted as mentors to the next generation or to my generation of feminist scholars, scholars who would take up gender issues in their work. Gopa, I don't know if Gopa is in the audience, Gopa, myself, Sharmishta, Madhushri is much younger, but these women were in some way influencing, the way to hold space as a woman scholar in a male dominated discipline, and yet at the same time work towards advancing the discipline. And from 2000 onwards, you see that there is a third generation emerging, third or maybe fourth generation emerging, where now gender issues are pretty much mainstreamed, and this mainstream is as much a result of the organic growth of the discipline as it is from structural, some kind of top down approach, where you have a model syllabus, which Professor Nangya, again my teacher, she introduced in the model curriculum, and then other universities followed suit. So now I change my slide again. Yeah, so just tell me if this is visible. Yeah, is this new slide visible? Is the new slide visible? Okay, so I'm assuming that it's visible, and I'm just going to carry on. So,
No, if you are changing the slide, next slide is, ma'am. This is,
yeah,
just click on the next
periscoping.
slide. Next slide then.
Yeah, so can you see the slide on periscoping?
Yeah, it is now quite beginning the Indian context. This is the slide actually right now.
Oh, okay. Let me
So just click on that. The next slide, ma'am.
Here. Now can you
Just
see?
click there. Yeah.
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 Yes.
Thank you. So I'll wait for cues from you.
Yes. Yes.
So in tracing this history and seeing the sure growth, sure and steady, but slightly slow growth of the subfield, I'm very, very impressed by the work of Nancy Hemestra. In 2017, she talks about an activist method called periscoping. And against this, I place certain theoretical frames which can help us, do more effective research within this subfield. And based on these, I have also given my own frame. I think my supervisor is here and my teachers are here. So I think they will remember the inception of this from my PhD days. So first, let's go to Hemestra's work. Hemestra names her method periscoping. She says the periscope, because of its association with military and covert activities, alludes to inherent power relations by beginning with the premise that certain topics have been barricaded from view due to the actions of the powerful. Therefore, periscoping should be understood as an activist methodology in step with long-standing feminist goals and intentionally political strategy that seeks to interrogate power relations and disrupt epistemic violence. Periscoping thus aims to reveal systems, processes, and experiences which are typically out of view, that have been previously left uninterrogated due to a lack of access or awareness. I would encourage everybody working in this subfield to please read Hemestra, especially this paper. Now, as against Hemestra's need to find other methods and other theoretical frames, I looked for theoretical frames which would help us understand our context, especially this refrain of औरत ही औरत की दुश्मन होती है, and women are women's enemy, etc. And I chanced upon this theory by Denis Kandioti, where she tries to outline what is called patriarchal bargains. So this lecture is not going to give me time to go full length into this theory, but Kandioti's theory of patriarchal bargains in 1988, South Joseph's work on kinship contracts in 1994, Geeta's work in 2007 on the productive and punitive aspects of patriarchy, these compelled me to come up to relook our frames, our perspectives, and come up with the idea of genderscapes. I started working towards it in my PhD, but it was published first in 2005, then in 2009, and finally a more polished version in 2011, and now further refined in 2021, and I'm still working on it. So this theory of genderscapes, again, you can read it, and please feel free to reach out if you want any of the early versions or even the latest version. As against this, I also came across this work by Deepa Narayan, which talks about with the title of the book is Chup, and she talks about this socialization or self erasure that trains women not to exist and to habitually delete themselves. Now this process or this praxis is so ingrained, so normalized, that it becomes, you know, invisible. And it is these that we in the last couple of years have been trying to uncover, excavate, and write about. I'm also influenced by Kate Munn's work in the same year, a year after Deepa Narayan, who the title of the book is Down Girl. And she talks of misogyny in different spheres of life, also in academia, as a choke collar, which kinds of acts towards putting women in their place, or women scholars in their place, in a position to be controlled through patriarchy. I again invoke Candiotti's work, 1988, you know, so long back, where she talks about classic patriarchy and the patriarchal bargain. And this whole culture of patriarchal bargains, I think, has bled into institutional contexts as well. And we as scholars need to be aware of this and try and disrupt this kind of epistemic violence that results from this. Now, from here on, now let me change the slide again. Yeah, just a minute, please. Yeah. So from this, did the slide change, Professor Jaybhai?
Yeah, it's change now. No problem.
Okay. So I promise you, this is probably my second last slide. Yeah. So now from this kind of context, and I'm sorry for racing through this in broad brushstrokes, but all of this has already been published and is there in the public domain. If any of you need copies, you're also free to reach out to me and save the latest, very latest version. I'm happy to share whatever you require, right? So now with this background, two projects made it possible for me to introspect on certain newer themes on gender and feminist geography, and also not only the themes but also the praxis. The first project is what is now known as a GenUp project, started with a small discussion and then grew into this GenUp project. Linda Peak, our PI based at York University, got the funding. So we had, it was a multi-country study with different cities: Cairo in Egypt, Cochabamba in Bolivia, Delhi in India, which I led, and Georgetown in Guyana, Ibadan in Nigeria, and Shanghai in China. So this working with these other scholars, other feminist scholars, on cities of the global south and poor women's lives in these cities, gave me an opportunity to use periscoping and reflect, come up with certain reflection. At the same time, we had the black swan event of the century, the COVID pandemic. And it was at this time, just as the pandemic was lifting, the lockdown was lifting, that I was funded by the University of Delhi, Institute of Eminence. This project was titled Mapping Violence, Hunger, Care Networks, Feminist Solidarities, Narratives of Precarious Women from metro and non-metro location. So both these projects, along with the following readings, which I'm again now going to change the slide. Just a minute here. Yeah. Can you see the new slide? Professor Jaybhai?
Yes.
Can you see? Yeah. Okay. So now these
I think one is the missing. Earlier one is something you have skipped or what?
No, projects and then this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, I just wanted to share with my friends in the audience that this is the work that has sort of shaped what I'm going to say now. So, I'm very influenced by Linda Peake's ideas on centering social reproduction in our research. And, this is like when Himestra talks about periscoping and she says, certain topics are invisible or we don't get data, etc. It's also a question of perspective. And if you center social reproduction, make it around, make your project or your project around social reproduction, then what do you get? So Linda Peake's very seminal work, which she wrote with a few other scholars, part of our Janab collective, a feminist urban theory of our time, rethinking social reproduction and the urban. And then another one which came out last year, but we have this year's date, that is doing feminist urban research, insights from the Janab project. So when we were engaged in these discussions, certain things I'd like to put on the table. One is this notion of centering social reproduction. It changes the way things become visible, what you see, what you can get data on, changes if you center social reproduction. The other is this recently published piece in Geographica Helvetica, where we feminist scholars were debating on crisis. So what we found in our project is that, the macro picture was of the COVID pandemic as a crisis, or a war as a crisis. So these are these big macro view crises. But in our field sites, our participants only obliquely referred to these larger crises. And mind you, this project is like global, it's not only in India. So the participants didn't allude to these larger crises, much to our surprise, but rather they talked about a daily crisis, the crisis of collecting water, the crisis of and the anxiety of having to pay off money lenders, to arrange money for day-to-day food, to pay the children's school fees, being stuck, what we call the sticky floors, being stuck at ground level jobs because of a whole variety of reasons, and leading to a very precarious position. So this prompted us to say that maybe we should rethink the notion of crisis itself and recognize that crisis plays out at multiple scales. And if you want to take a feminist or gendered view of the crisis, you need to start from the smallest scale, the scale of the everyday, the scale of the body, the scale of the household, right? And then, of course, this piece, which our Dialogues in Human Geography group, all of us editors, we sat and debated on this piece, and this was our introductory article, Reimagining the Futures of Geographical Thought and Practice, which again told us that we are now in an era of, it's like polyverse, not universe, polyverse, multiple little nodes, multiple crises, multiple worlds, and there is a feasibility of being able to connect through this. And finally, and it's time for me to now kind of sign off, the latest piece where along with a collaborator, I'm looking at what all these insights that these other readings have brought me into women's work in the city. And I'm referring to women's work. We think of it as something that is fluid, that is slithery, sticky. It transverses different scales, and like water, it tends to flow and fill in care gaps. So we argue that women's work is essential to city making, and therefore we need to look at this through a feminist lens. and understand the strong links that women's work in the city has with precarity, has with violence, and has with debt. So you can find this in the recently published handbook on gender and cities. For lack of time, I'm going to conclude here with these new directions. So what we've done in today's lecture is looked a little at the past, situated ourselves as a subfield in the chronology of events, and thrown up certain directions where feminist research is going, and we could take these directions borrowing Hemestra's activist method of of periscoping. Yeah. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm going to stop sharing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Anindita Datta, for your presentation. It was a fantastic presentation, looking at different dimensions of gender and feminist geographies, from the global to the Indian context. I wish, we had time to, in fact, take in a few questions, but, this is a foundation day lecture, and the conventions do not allow us to, in fact, invite questions. But just a few observations, if I may be allowed to put in some of my observations on what you presented. And it's certainly not the time limits us to, in fact, pick up a few themes. But it's very interesting that when you said that, in India there was hardly any debate. True. When we look at Indian geography, geography in India, we really don't find much of a debate. But this is not to say that there was no debate outside geography. Yeah, outside geography, if you look at the writings, not only in English, but I'm aware of writings, which appeared in Hindi magazines. In 70s, mid 70s, Dinman. There was a magazine which, in fact, was edited by this famous. Now she's in her 80s. I'm forgetting her name, but it was known as Vama. And that was all on gender discourse, and it coincided with the changes which were being brought about in the policy within India. So Indian context will have to be understood slightly differently, because you see, while the West, particularly in the United States and in some certain parts of the Western world, women didn't even have the right to vote, until about 1924, 25. We in India, we started with the premise through our independence movement, where we sought participation of women, and we had fairly good number of women leaders participating. So that really set the course, which in fact may not have been very much visible in the politics, but in the constitutional framework of equality of opportunity, which of course needed to be further looked at in the context of what was really happening on the ground. And so it was this spirit which really did not create much of a crisis or a conflict, also because of the fact that, there was always this patriarchal bargain which went on, and you were right. So therefore, it's not a very simple story. It will have to be seen as to where and at what stage, we were in a position to really emphatically talk about. And in 70s, mid 70s was the time. It also becomes possible because, we under the population policy, we in India started multiplying the mother and child welfare schemes, which required that, there was enormous employment opportunities for women. Therefore, there were formal employment opportunities coming in, not only for women in health center, in care industry, but also in schools, because, there were also reports that, women teachers were better off in primary and elementary classes, which provided greater opportunities for women to, in fact, come in formal employment. But that also meant double work. We all know that. But it also created a certain kind of a negotiation in small towns and in cities and so on and so forth. So you are right. Periscoping is one thing, but at the same time, it's also very important for us to, in fact, look at as to what is the nature of discourse which, in fact, takes place in our villages. It's something, which, in fact, has remained absolutely hidden. And therefore, no matter how you periscope it, but, there is a lot of literature in the fiction world, which, in fact, in different languages, right? One can go to South, one can really rely on the Telugu, the Malayalam, and we have a very rich tradition in Maharashtra of, and you have a fairly good amount of writing, which, in fact, has come from Maharashtra. Sharmila Rege has done fairly good amount of work on this, so one can really see that there are various kinds of streams. Now, what is that which, in fact, we geographers have been missing out on? One thing, and there are many other aspects which one can talk about, but one thing that we geographers were missing out on is that, especially in the Indian context, that whenever there is a discourse on gender, on feminism, and so on and so forth, geographers could be publishing in geography magazines or within their own community, but when it comes to really entering into some kind of a dialogue with sociologists, historians, and so on and so forth, we really don't really see them there. So, in fact, that invisibility is also self-made. If we perhaps, move out of our classrooms and also negotiate with, you see, there are a number of issues on which we have not been writing popular articles, on issues of gender and space. Say, for example, when we were talking about architecture, there are Sujata Patel and several others in Mumbai. They have been really putting in, looking at architecture from the feminist perspective, which, in fact, makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to designing something, which we use in our homes, how much of that is really based on feminist perspective. So therefore, we really need to look at some of these, which, in fact, would make a lot of sense. And naturally, we can't put all the responsibility on geographers. So, but it's very important that we geographers open up and we negotiate and we enter into a dialogue with others. And this is one of the reasons why we thought, we must have you. And while you were in dialogue with the international community, it's also very important that, the scope of this dialogue is expanded and not just limited to women, but also to men who may be having certain amount of good, what you can call it, affinity with feminine issues, not feminine issues, but feminist issues. हमारे गांव में कहते हैं कि जब आप बीवी के बारे में या घर में किसी महिला के तरफ उनका साथ दें, तो हमारे गांव में कहते हैं कि ये जोड़ू का गुलाम है. तो वैसे एक जनरेशन मर्दों का है जो कि जिसको आप विद इन कोर्स जोरू का गुलाम कह सकते हैं, लेकिन उनकी भी बातें, और वहीं पे मैं सरस्वती राजू जी को याद करना चाहूंगा कि उन्होंने ये कहा कि ये केवल पैट्रियार्की नहीं है, और पैट्रियार्की को भी समझने का एक दूसरा जरिया हो सकता है, दैट इज दैट bring men into conversation on issues with which in fact are related to gender, because can't just be confined to women alone, because after all, men and women, they constitute the society. So that's wonderful. Listening to you, Professor Datta, and then we will certainly have you speak the last word. But
Yes.
before,
So in our old tradition of constant debate and argument between mentor and mentee, I must have the last word.
yes,
सर,
yes,
पहली
yes.
बात, मैं आप पे ये आरोप लगा रही हूँ कि आपने ध्यान से सुना नहीं। मैंने कहा था बहुत ही clearly about inception of Manushi, which came out in 1979, and Manushi was translated into several languages. There is a lot of vernacular literature, as you alluded to, in many different languages.
नहीं, मैं तो आप ही की बात,
हाँ, gender and space. But
नहीं,
यहाँ
मैं
पे
तो
सर,
मैं आप ही की बात कर रहा था
जी जी
कि जो ये मानुषी एक पत्रिका थी, वामा था,
वामा है, बहुत सारे थे सर, इवन
दिनमान, बहुत सारे लोगों में
जी
ये एक ज्यादा दिन चला नहीं, लेकिन ये सिलसिला चला। मानुषी तो काफी दिनों तक रहा।
जी
तो
और सर,
हाँ, तो ये रहा है,
now
ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि
I'm going to say sir, और जो आप कह रहे हैं अब, now these two projects were on different kinds of towns, so I talked about towns, right? But when Himestra is talking about periscoping, she is not confining it to the only the urban. It can be used anywhere, rural areas, everywhere. And when we talk about patriarchy today, anybody who's read the literature is well aware that you do not take people outside their context. I mean, it's not only women, but it could be anyone, So this, when we allude to, when we say patriarchy or patriarchal marriage, we're not only talking about women. I invite all my male colleagues to please start working on gender. Tell us what toxic masculinity does. Tell us how masculinity operates through benevolent paternalism, which will not accord space, which will coin issues like Zoru ka Gulam. I mean, is it Zoru ka Gulam?
Exactly, that was the whole purpose. I was just extending your.
Forward. In fact, two of my PhD students, the first PhD students were men. So what I'm saying is that this is a way of looking which is not exclusive, rather feminist geographies, not to be translated literally into women's geographies, but feminist geographies, every scholar today knows it is about race, it is equally about gender, it's about sexuality, it's about location, it is about disability, it is about class, it is about caste. So we do not take feminist geographies literally, but then as always, thank you for the suggestions and thank you for the space, for giving me the space to be here. And I'm going to catch you as soon as you come back from New York, and we must continue this debate.
The idea was basically to, in fact, make use of this opportunity to reach out to as many people, to, in fact, extend whatever you said, because when we say that, I was basically commenting on that, we didn't have the debate, but, the Western, as you were pointing out, that, the colonial perspective and the Western perspective has been so very predominant that we in India, because of our training in Western, Western kind of geography or science or social science, we tend to ignore some kinds of histories, which we have forgotten. Say, for example, it's now emerging in a very, very big way. And that's why I really talked about Marathi. And I talked about Sharmila Rege, who's in fact, unfortunately, not no more.
Yes, we
And
lost
several
her.
others, who have been, like, you mentioned our friend from Bardhaman, Gopa.
Gopa.
So there are many people who are in fact entering, crossing over
Yes.
the
They're
boundaries
all
and,
doing
getting
valuable
into
work.
some
Look at
kind of a
Kuntala's
negotiation.
work. So many
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah. So that was the whole point which I was really trying to project. I was trying to not question your presentation, but take leaf out of your presentation.
Sir,
in order
everybody
that
has the
we
right to
could.
question. ये तो आप ही ने सिखाया है, sir.
नहीं
I'm
क्वेश्चन
not
नहीं कर
afraid
रहे.
of being questioned.
हम क्वेश्चन नहीं कर रहे. ये
फाउंडेशन तो यहाँ तक आए, सर.
हम क्वेश्चन नहीं कर रहे. हम
सर,
बात
फिर
को
तो आप
आगे
हार
बढ़ा
गए.
रहे हैं.
फिर तो आप हार
हम
गए.
बात
You have to question.
नहीं,
But
आज
yes,
क्वेश्चन
as
नहीं
you
करेंगे.
had-
आज बात को आगे बढ़ाएंगे ना,
बात आगे बढ़ाएंगे. ठीक है, सर.
क्योंकि
We
आपको
agree
भी
to
जाना है.
disagree.
45 होने वाले हैं
Yes.
और देवेंद्र
Yes.
कुमार नायक जी भी इंतजार कर रहे हैं. उनको
Yes.
भी कुछ बोलना होगा. And
जी.
so I
Thank
think
you, sir.
with these words, and I will again thank Anindita for
Thank
her presentation. And this is just an opportunity for us to, in fact, as I said, a 35 minutes presentation is not good enough. She has mentioned many papers that she referred to. And I think those who are interested will certainly get in touch with her,
Yes.
or obtain those papers. They're all available, and read them, get back to her, or get into some kind of a debate. I mean, the whole idea is that, what was missing was the debate. And that was the point, which Anindita pointed out, and we should get into some kind of a debate, So over to Professor Naik now for the closing words, and also thanking the speaker of the day, of the 46th Foundation Day of the Institute of Indian Geographers. Over to you, Professor Naik.
Thank you, Professor Sinha. I've been listening to this talk on gender and feminist studies from, as you rightly said, on a multi-dimensional perspectives, from global to Indian, and also very elegantly, Professor Datta has presented some of those very, very touchy aspects, I would say, and also important in their own ways, particularly the concept of periscoping, or for that matter, the self-erasure by women, that they're basically trained not to exist. And that leads to the whole concept of invisibility that we often talk about when you talk, we read about women's erasure, complete erasure from geographies. In a way, my job has been made easier. I thought I would speak something about all those issues, but I think the small debate that we had between who should I say, the president and the speaker, or the supervisor and the student.
Supervisor and student.
I think the later part is much more beautiful in a way, when both of them engage in a debate and discussion. That's the most beautiful part of any discussion that we can hear, which we saw briefly. I would have loved to hear it for a longer time, but the time wouldn't permit. But my present duty now here is to thank each one of you. To start with the speaker, Professor Datta, whom I know personally. She's from Shillong, by the way, and I remember when she was a young girl, and we met just after her graduation, and she was looking forward to admission, and wanted to inquire where she should go. I had advised her that you must go to JNU. And that would really open up your world. And I'm with some satisfaction, I can say today that I wasn't wrong. And
Thank
look
you.
at where she has reached and the way she has conquered what should I say, a male space that she has always accused. Why she? I think most of us accuse that the whole geography space was male dominated. And today you see that she has dominated all of us in terms of her academic performance and also her reaching and the height of being the vice president at an international forum. All these are achievements which we celebrate. But more than that, I celebrate her brilliant speech today, brilliant talk, outstanding, I should say, in several ways. And I was looking forward to listening to her after a long, long time. And I was really greatly benefited from what she spoke today. And I must thank her for sparing time on a Sunday when she should be resting after a week-long work, very, very arduous task that she is now taken onto herself. Thank you, Dr. Datta, for agreeing to speak on this extraordinary day when we are all celebrating our 46th year of journey, IIG. And I also thank Professor Dikshit, who may be present today. I don't know if he's still there, but we all wanted him to be here on this occasion when he must be looking at with some satisfaction that what he began as a small, I mean, we saw it as a baby in his hands, now is maturing, and we have reached this stage today when we can have these lectures and activities which are now coming much more regularly than what it used to be earlier. Thank you, Professor Sinha. We have deprived you of your sleep, but not of your energy. You know, I could see the kind of energy that I saw when we were together and in JNU and you know, doing all these debates till 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I could see the spark of that an energy in you when you were engaging with your student. And that was the best part of it, as I mentioned earlier. But this program wouldn't have been really a success if we didn't have such a huge participation of the intellectuals and geographers who joined us from all over the country.
And also from outside, I mean,
from outside.
I can see Bhagi. Thank you, Bhagirathi, for being with us this afternoon.
So many of them have joined, and I was pleasantly surprised to find so many of them joined so quickly with a short notice. And Professor Jaybhai, who has been our bhai always.
Yes.
in
Mumbai wala bhai to nahi?
No, not that way. And he is so good at organizing these events.
Right.
And thank you very much, Professor Jaybhai, and all the executive committee members, governing council members who have been present here, particularly Professor Bimalkar, who also joined us from Guwahati. And we all had a feast today when it comes to listening to such a brilliant talk by Professor Datta. Thank you all. Thank you.
Sir, one just regarding for all this technical support for the last 2 days. This Mr. Ajay Gawari, he has taken care. And
thank you, Ajay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really very clean. Very
जी
clean.
लेकिन रिक्वेस्ट है कि थोड़ा लंबा गैप हो रहा है, 1 महीने में कम से कम एक बार मुलाकात होनी चाहिए।
हाँ, कुछ करेंगे साहब। आप हैं तो कुछ ना कुछ होता रहेगा।
थैंक यू।
Thank you.